Mr. Christian with those back doors. It's just really, really bright shooting through there. Thanks, man. Awesome. Well, are you guys having a good time so far? I think we've had some really great time together, some good sessions. I think the Lord has really just incorporated all these messages to go really well together, and things that we need to hear and things that we need to apply in our marriage, right? So thank you for coming to this breakout session. This one is titled The 5 Types of Intimacy. And really what we're diving into is just talking about the different types of intimacy in marriage between husband and wife. And a lot of times I think when we talk about intimacy, we only think of one thing. You know, at least guys do. When we talk about intimacy, we automatically go towards sex. I mean, we just do. It's in our makeup. That's how we think. And so that's the first thing we think of. But what this session is designed to do is really describe and walk through and talk through all the different levels of intimacy and how physical intimacy is a part of those 5, but it's not even the most important one. So it's important, but it's not the most important. And we're going to talk about what that looks like and what the most important one is in a minute. So if you have your notepads with you, break them out. Let's write this stuff down and kind of give you an opportunity to go back later and review it and see where it applies in your life. And then, so we're going to teach through for about half the time. We're going to walk through and talk about the 5 types of intimacy. And then the last half of the time, we're going to take some Q&A. So we're going to take some questions, and we'll just shoot from the hip. We'll answer and talk and discuss. And if we can't get you an answer off the hip, I'll get your email and we'll get you an answer, right? So we're not above saying, hey, we definitely don't know all the answers, but we know somebody who does, right? God can certainly answer it, and we can find out what that is and get it back to you. So we're going to do some Q&A at the end. So if we talk about the 5 types of intimacy, and Jess and I are kind of going to go back and forth and talk about each one, but the first one is physical intimacy, right? And physical intimacy is so important in a marriage, but physical intimacy isn't all sex, right? There's different aspects of physical intimacy that we need to remember. Physical intimacy is really physical connection. So when Jess and I connect like this, and I put my arm around her and I hug her and I draw her close, that's physical intimacy, right? She said I'm smushing her. But when we hold hands, like if we're walking in public and I reach over and grab her hand, as I'm accustomed to do, usually she's behind. Like she's got smaller legs than I do, so she's got a shorter stride. So oftentimes I'm like this, like catch up. And she'll grab my hand and walk together, right? And that's physical intimacy. And a lot of times, us guys, physical intimacy is most important, usually to men, but non-sexual physical intimacy is most important to a wife, right? And typically, the average marriage guru or the average therapist would say that women need 10 to 12 non-sexual intimate touches physically to every sexual physical touch intimately. That means that throughout the day, there needs to make sure some non-sexual embraces need to occur throughout the day before you get to anything resembling that later on, right? And usually when you say that, you're like, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah.
That does not count.
That's not what I'm talking about, right? But all throughout the day, you need to make sure that you make some kind of contact with your wife. You give a hug, just a touch on the shoulder, right? And that kind of stuff is so important to men. And as we talk about physical intimacy, a lot of times that's one of the toughest areas of our marriages. Our camera operators, are your parents in the room? Are they in the room? No, they're at another session. Are you guys comfortable with me discussing this stuff? Yeah, they're out of our youth group, so I just want to make sure. All right, if you guys are good, you put in your earbuds or something. So a lot of times when we talk about sex and marriage, sex is one of the hardest topics to really get on the same page on in marriage a lot of times, and it causes some of the biggest conflicts. Like the 3 biggest issues in a marriage oftentimes are sex, money, and time, right? So those things create most of our conflicts, and sex is usually one of them. And a lot of times it's because we come into marriage with a different perspective oftentimes than our spouse about what sex is, what it's about, what's important about it, those kinds of things, which is why when I do premarital counseling, I use SYMBIS, and SYMBIS takes a good section of premarital counseling and discusses this. What are your expectations? What does it look like to you? How does it, what do you believe about it? And those things are so important when we come to a marriage. One of the 3 G's of sex in marriage are God, gross, or gift. It's the 3 ways you can view it. A lot of times in many marriages, one person or the other views sex as God. And what I mean by that is it's an idol in their life, right? And they worship at the altar of it. And when you worship at the altar of that in your life, it really affects your marriage negatively because you see it as an idol. The other way that it affects our marriage negatively is we come into it thinking it's gross. And people who don't understand that. But people who have had certain experiences in their life where it's been forced upon them or where it's been an abuse situation, things like that, it can create things in your psyche that when you come together in marriage, you can view it as gross. So you could have 2 people married where one views it as God and one views it as gross, right? And neither one of those are happy, proper places for that in our marriage. The most important aspect of viewing it in our marriage is the other G, and that's gift. That God gave us sex as a gift for our marriage so that we could connect and be a part and understand that it comes from God. It's not God, right? And understand that it's important in our marriage, but it's not the ultimate thing in our marriage, right? So that's all about physical intimacy. I'll let Jessica move into the next one.
Before we move on to the next one, I just want to mention something. And if you are viewing sex as God, that's one of the issues that he said where you're looking to your spouse to be your source. Because you're going to constantly look to them to fulfill that need sexually. And if you're viewing sex as God, it's never going to be enough. It's never going to be good enough. You're always going to be looking for the next thing. So that's just something to think about. That's a good litmus test to know if you're viewing sex as God too.
Hey, Seth, can you turn the gate off of her mic? She's so soft-spoken, it's cutting in and out.
Sorry. But I just thought that was an extra part of the physical intimacy. I'm going to be talking about intellectual intimacy, and intellectual intimacy is a lot different. That is sharing with each other what you think about any given subject. And just as a side note, you're not going to get to physical intimacy if you never let somebody tell you what they think about anything. You need to be sharing that kind of intimacy too if you want to get to the next level of intimacy. But yeah, in a healthy relationship. So sharing what you think about any given topic. Most of us are pretty good about putting our 2 cents in. Our spouse usually knows our opinion if we give it enough, but this isn't really about opinions or about how we feel about something. It's literally what we think about something. So one of the things that is good to remember in any marriage is that you're 2 individuals, so you never think exactly alike. You're not an extension of each other, and it's okay that you have 2 different thoughts on different subjects. You can run into problems when it's stuff like about child rearing or whatever, things that are really, really important, but there's a lot of things that don't matter that you may just think different about, and that's okay. We're all entitled to have different thoughts, and there's reasons why we think differently. Intellectual intimacy is conversational, so it's not just keeping it to yourself, but it's when you talk about it. Hey, what do you think about this? I can't speak for everybody in the room, but I love hearing how different people think and view the world and how they think about different things. So it's always fun to ask, hey, what do you think about that? And it may be completely different than what you think, but it's still interesting. And also, the question would come next, well, why do you think that? And you really get to know somebody when you share and when you not only share what you think, but when you ask them, what do you think? And it lets you know that they value what they have to say.
A lot of times I refer to the intellectual intimacy as like the dragnet of relationships. How many of you remember the old show Dragnet? Right? Some of the older folks in the room will definitely remember the show. Some of the less older but still older folks probably remember the movie, but Dragnet was about two officers, and they were very stern. And whenever they walked in a room and began to investigate a crime, and they would have somebody being very emotional, trying to tell them what happened, they would stop them and say, "Ma'am, nothing but the facts." Nothing but the facts. And a lot of times our intellectual intimacy in our marriage looks like that, right? The intellectual intimacy part is the facts. That's the facts of our day. So when we communicate and share with each other, we're sharing the facts of what happened. And what does that look like? That's Jess and I, if we've been apart all day, I've been doing something and she's been doing something, we get together and she asks me, "What have you done today?" And I give her the facts of what I've done today. Not how I felt about it, not what I think about it, but just the facts, right? That's part of the entering the door of intellectual intimacy. So intellectual intimacy occurs when you give the facts and then you ask the next question, which takes you to the next level, which is, what do you think about it? So if you're struggling with communicating with your spouse, and can I tell you today that these things are so important, and understanding these 5 levels of intimacy are so important, because we see so many marriages who exist on just a level 1 communication level in their marriage. That means that all they ever do and the only way they ever talk is like this. Husband walks in the door after a day, wife greets him, "Hey there, hi, how was your day?" "Fine." "What are you going to do?" "Mowing the grass." Boom. And they walk down the hall, and that's it, right? And they exist on that kind of level of communication. And if that's the only level of communication that you have, you never get to true intimacy, right? You never fully know each other. So it requires hearing the fact and then going one step further, and what do you think about that? And that's where intellectual intimacy comes in. The next level from that is called emotional intimacy. So emotional intimacy is the next one. And emotional intimacy is probably strikes the heart of fear in every man in the room. I mean, it probably does. We're like, we do not want to get into emotionalism.
Let's talk about our feelings.
Like, I've definitely got to go mow the grass now, right? Like, I do not want to, I don't want to break that seal. I don't want to know what's coming out of there, right? And a lot of times we get scared of that. And the truth is, if you've never done it, it is scary. Man, and if you've never broken that seal, it is a lot. If you've never asked your wife to share her feelings with you, and then she does the first time, you're probably gonna have a little tick for a week. I mean, you're gonna be walking around messed up, because it's like this waterfall of emotion that just hits you all at once. But this is the thing: as you grow this in your marriage, and as you add the concepts of this into your conversation, then you don't get a waterfall or a fire hose all at once. It's because you learn to incorporate it to where it's an everyday conversation, and it looks like this. "Hey, how was your day?" "Fine." "What did you do today?" "I did this." "Oh, really? What did you think about having to do that today?" "Oh, man, it stunk." And this, "Oh, really? Well, why did it stink? How do you feel about that?" "And this is how I feel about it." Right? And it's just taking a few seconds to ask a few questions to go a little deeper into your spouse's day. Right? And like I said, a lot of times, a lot of marriages exist on "fine, thank you, mow the grass, see you later." Right? And they exist there. But can I tell you, they don't exist healthily there, and there's not a real deep connection there. And like Jessica said earlier, if you're not connecting on these levels, it's really hard to connect on a physical level, as well. So it's so important for us to connect on all of these. So emotion is just sharing this. It's simply, how do I feel about this topic? And this is give and take, right? It's not one person doing all the sharing, not one person doing all the feeling. And the truth is, every man in this room feels some kind of way about things. We do. We just don't like to tell you about it, right? We will readily share with you what we think about something, but we won't usually tell you how we feel about it. Right, and it's just kind of how we're made. I would say it's less of a God-made thing in us and more of a culturally created thing in us. That culturally, it's created men to react and act that way. But here's the thing, man: is connecting with my wife on a deeper level makes every level of our life better. So if I'm able to connect with her intellectually and know how she thinks about something, and I know how I think about something, we're able to have some intellectual conversations, man, and it's way more stimulating to be engaged with my wife in that way, right? To know what she thinks about something and have an intellectual conversation. And then the second part of that is what she feels about it. Okay, you think this, how does that make you feel? And understand how she feels about it takes it to a whole nother level. right? So you got these 5 types of intimacy, and they all interact together. So Jess will hit the next one.
The next one is social intimacy, and that's how we interact with people as a couple. So that's like when we're together and how we are when we're spending time with friends, how we are if we're, with other couples, just how we interact with one another as a couple. So that's whether you're on a date, a double date, friend group, here at church, how you act as a couple. When people see one and they see the other, it's how you move around as a unit, basically.
Yeah.
It's not really a whole lot to
Social
that.
intimacy is important, but it's the easiest one out of the thing because it's just making sure that you do things as a couple. I think there was a big portion of our marriage when we first got married where we didn't have any social intimacy. So what that means is in any of our time away from work, she would go spend time with her cousins or with her friends, and I would go spend time with my friends. Right, and we didn't socially interact as a couple together. And what social interaction as a couple together is building your intimacy because every part of your life should be impacted by each other. That doesn't mean that you don't ever go hang out with just your friends, right? That doesn't mean that. But if that's all you do, and you don't have a group, a friend group or a church group or somebody that you go to and you connect as a couple, then you're missing out on one of the 5 types of intimacy.
A good litmus test with that would be if you mention your husband or wife and people say, "Oh, you're married?" You have one of those? It's a good indicator. You may not have good social intimacy. Just saying.
Yeah, true. So the next one, guys, is spiritual intimacy. So you have physical intimacy, intellectual intimacy, emotional intimacy, social intimacy, and spiritual intimacy. Now, when I said in the beginning that physical intimacy is so important, but it's not the most important one, spiritual intimacy is 100% the most important type of intimacy you can have. Because if your relationship is in good standing before God, and you are connected on a spiritual level, because we're body, soul, and spirit. So if we're connected on a spiritual level, it's way easier to connect on a soul level, right? So if we connect with God spiritually, intimately together, then our soul, which is our mind, our will, and our emotions, which is what we think and what we feel, it's easier to connect after that, right? So connecting on a spiritual level takes you to a whole different level. That's spiritual intimacy is it sounds like it's so profound, but really it's not. Really, it's just being intentional about taking these steps as a couple. What do those steps look like? It looks like this: sharing what God is doing in me or saying to me recently. All right, if God is speaking to you in your time, if you've been in the Word or you've been in prayer or you've been sitting in church and you heard something in the message and God spoke to you through that, and you got convicted about something, or God is talking to you about taking you to another level in some part of your life, if you don't share that with your spouse, then you don't have spiritual intimacy. And so it's so important that the one person, if you're married, the first person you should want to share that with is your spouse, right? And some of you are like, well, what if he's talking to me about being a better husband? Well, definitely share that with your spouse, right? What if he's talking to me about being a better wife? Share that with your spouse, man. You're going to get some points for that, right? It's a good thing.
And accountability.
Yeah, so it's not something to hide from or something to run from, right? So here's some lies that hinder our spiritual intimacy if we let them. The first one is this: we must be on the same level spiritually to be able to communicate about our spiritual walk. Listen, I don't know very many couples that are on the same level spiritually. Almost every time, one or the other is on a deeper level with God. There's a lot of ministry couples that I know that are both active in ministry, called to ministry, who are on the same level spiritually. There's a ton of other couples who are not active in ministry and in that sort of calling, who one or the other will be spiritually deeper than the other one. And you know what? To be spiritually intimate does not require you be on the same level. Because I hear a lot of times, man, I just can't talk to him about these things because he doesn't understand it because he's on a different level with God. Well, if you never talk to him about these things, you're never going to connect in those ways. So you have to start somewhere, right? You have to be able to start speaking about these things so that you can connect in these ways. And I understand there's a book written by, it's called Pathways to God. Who wrote that? Gary Thomas. So Gary Thomas is an author, wrote this book called Sacred Pathways to God, and it's not about there being multiple paths to God. What it's about is how people themselves kind of feel and seek God. And sometimes people will go get alone in nature to commune with God and pray and spend their time with Him. And sometimes people will feel it through music or praise and worship, will feel closer to God, and sometimes through reading the Word. But it's just different pathways, different ways that we feel closer to God. And you may have a different way that you feel closer to God than your spouse, and that's okay, right? It's okay that you're different, but you still need to connect about it. You still need to talk about it and share what God's doing or saying in your life with each other, and that builds spiritual intimacy. Here's the second lie that oftentimes happens, and I think this is a cultural thing. It's definitely not a biblical thing. It's definitely not something that should have been preached, but it's definitely a cultural thing. My spiritual growth is my own business. And I don't know where that comes from, but I see it a lot. Right? No, that's my business. My relationship with God is my business. That's not my wife's business. Right? And you run into moments like that, and I'm like, man, I don't know where that mindset comes from, but I want you to know today that's a lie from the devil. Man, your spiritual walk should be connected with your wife. You're one before God. You're in covenant before God. You should be able to connect spiritually with each other, and your spiritual walk is your wife's business. And your spiritual walk is your husband's business, right? Together, you should be talking about these things and growing, right? You're not an island unto yourself once you put a ring on it, right? If you got a ring on it, right, you're not an island. You're together in this thing. You're in covenant.
So just a thought about that. That could have originated from a browbeating husband or wife. That was like, you're not in your word enough, or you're not, and somebody that just kept being critical.
Kind of beating them over the head.
Yeah, and beating them over the head, and then they're just like, it's none of your business what I'm doing.
Good call.
Just a thought.
Yeah.
Because we should be encouraging another, but nagging doesn't change, and Steve talked about that earlier. Nagging doesn't change people. So the best thing to do if you see your spouse is not maybe moving in the direction, you can always mention it, but then take it to the Lord in prayer, because the Holy Spirit can get things done so much more effectively than the nagging. And you don't want it to go the opposite direction either.
Yeah. So here's some actions that promote spiritual intimacy, right? These are some things you can do, and it feels like so basic, but it is, right? I think a lot of times we make things that are spiritual so elusive, but it's not. Like, these are basic ways that you can be spiritually connected with your spouse. Number one, just talk about it. Man, read a story in the Word, and then sit down and talk about it. Take a chapter of Matthew, read it together, and then ask questions of each other about it. What do you think this means? What do you think Jesus meant when he did this or said this? And just having a conversation, right? Or, hey, in church today, pastor said this. Or during worship, I felt like the Lord told me this. And you have these moments where you're connected to God, and then you just share it with each other. You just talk about it. Right? So that's the easiest gateway into being spiritually intimate together, is just chatting about it. The second one is praying together. And praying together, I think, feels so foreign for most couples. Most couples struggle with it and it feels so foreign, and I think that's a trick of the enemy to keep you from really connecting spiritually. Because some of the hardest times that we have as couples connecting is connecting before the Lord in prayer. And if that's a struggle for you, can I tell you today, you're not alone. Most couples struggle with it, but it's worth battling through to get to the other side of it. And listen, when you pray together, it doesn't have to be some King James Version, haughty, lofty, incredibly amazing prayer. That's not what your spouse needs out of you. So if you're intimidated to pray over your spouse because you don't think you can pray lofty enough or deep enough, or you don't have enough a spiritual, just to be able to pray to impress them, that's not what it's about, right? Your spouse, I guarantee you, if you're struggling to pray together because you don't think you pray well, if you prayed like a first grader, they would be impressed. If you grabbed your wife and prayed over her like a first grader, if you grabbed your husband and prayed over her in first grade language, they would be impressed. Lord Jesus, be with my wife today. Lord, would you just protect her? Would you make sure she comes home safe? You know, as she drives today, Lord, would you just protect her and keep angels around her and just stop any possible accidents that might occur to her? Lord, would you just help her? I know she's struggling with this meeting that's coming up. Lord, would you give her what she needs for that meeting? Lord, would you just bring my wife back to me because, God, I love her so much. Thank you, Lord. Amen. And if you just prayed like that over each other every day, man, it would build your spiritual intimacy by miles. It doesn't have to be lofty. If you can get lofty and prophesy over each other, do that, right? But if you can't, do what you can do, right? Do what you can do. Just be you, you know?
That's also, the enemy knows that if you guys get on the same page together, if you become spiritually intimate, if you pray together, he knows the power that is there. And so he will fight you, whether it's making you feel uncomfortable, making you feel intimidated, whatever. He doesn't want you to know the powerhouse that you can be together as a couple. There's nothing like a praying couple praying in their wayward child, or praying, against the struggle that they're having, or praying for each other. I mean, there's nothing that can stand up under that. There's power in there. So we have to give the devil a black eye and work past uncomfortableness so that we can move forward and that we can be praying together. It's really important.
Yeah. The next one is study together. And I want to just make 2 quick points of this. In order for you to study the Word together, you have to be intentional. You have to create space and time in your day to do it. So it has to be an intentional act. But here's the thing it can't be. Woman, get out of bed and meet me at the table right now. We're going to study the book of Hosea this morning. Yeah, it can't be that, right? If you're forcing your spouse to do it or forcing your family to do it, the heart is not there. Right? The heart's not behind it. It needs to be a spiritual connection where you're doing these other things first. You're talking about your spiritual walk. You're sharing with each other what God is doing in your walk and in your life together. You're praying together, right? You're doing these things. And then if you're doing those things consistently, the natural outflow of that then will be a desire to talk about and study together. Now, Jess and I have been pastoring together for a lot of years, doing marriage ministry together for a lot of years. We don't do the same Bible study, right? So if I need to set some people free today, we don't sit down with the same Bible study. That might work for you. That doesn't work for us. But you know what we do? When she studies and gets prepared for something and is reading and doing a Bible study, she will come in and plop down where I'm at and where I'm working and where I'm studying and start to ask me questions about it. Hey, what do you think about this? Hey, in the book of Judges, chapter 2, this happened, and what do you think about that? And she'll start to talk to me about it, and then if I don't have the answer, I grab my study Bible, go to it, begin to read some commentary on it. We'll look it up, begin to discuss it back and forth, and find the answer together. And even though we're not doing the same Bible study, we're studying together, right? So it's just a matter of including each other in your life. All of these different types of intimacy are including each other in your life. And if you include each other in your spiritual life, everything else will flow way better out of the rest of it, right? So, and then the last one is, I'll let Jess cover that, is serving together.
Serving together. No. Serving together can actually look a lot of different ways because that's under spiritual intimacy, I would say it's serving church or like serving the Lord together, but there's so many different ways you can serve together. If there's a need and you see somebody in need and you go and meet the need together, maybe somebody has something broken in their house and that's something that you can fix, and you go over there together and he's fixing a door while you're visiting with the wife. I mean, that's serving together. Serving together at the church is a wonderful thing because you're able to do that together, and that promotes not only physical intimacy but social intimacy because you're moving around as a couple. So there's a lot of things that serving together can look like.
So important. So those are the 5 types of intimacy, guys, and we wanted to hit on. So we're going to go ahead and say bye to our recording and the cameras, and thank you so much, guys. You can stop.